I would say a year ago, people were very hesitant. I mean, over the last 7 years that we've been doing this, they were hesitant. I'm not going to lie. We had a lot of conversations. You named it, name it. We had a conversation. Then we saw something turn over this year, which is really ironic because the U.S. government has been very much bullies across our industry and scared a lot of people away.
This content is brought to you by BitGo, which is one of the top crypto custodians in the crypto industry. BitGo works with many big companies and brands, such as Pantera Capital, Bitstamp, and Bitcoin IRA. Nike also selected BitGo to power its wallets for its NFTs. And BitGo has many great services, such as hot wallets, custodial wallets, self-managed cold wallets, and NFT wallets. Many institutions trust BitGo with its top-level security and incredible services, such as being able to deploy your capital while it's in custody, which includes lending, borrowing, trading, staking, DeFi access, and more. If you'd like to learn more about BitGo, please visit bitgo.com, link in the description. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and my guest today is Ben Jorgensen, who's the CEO of Constellation Network. Ben, great to see you.
Good to see you too, Tony. Thank you.
Yeah, Ben, great to have you on. I'm excited to chat with you. We met in person earlier this year, and just last week, Constellation Network had a great conference, and there were some big partnership announcements and so forth. So I have a lot of questions around those things, but I'd love to get to know you a bit better. Tell us about yourself, where you're
Sure.
from, and what's your professional background.
Yeah, so I actually live up in San Francisco area right now, so on the West Coast. But when I was a young kid, I grew up in Indiana, although I'm proud to say that I've now lived on the West Coast longer than I did when I grew up. But Indiana was really good in terms of giving you a lot of values, kind of reaching for the stars. And it's been a road to get out west. It's been a journey.
What was your first encounter with Bitcoin or crypto? What was your aha moment?
Yeah, so interesting enough, back in I want to say 2016, 2017, I worked for a spinoff of Accenture. Accenture, the big consulting firm, we had a digital transformation program that I spearheaded as chief revenue officer, where we would disrupt Fortune 500 companies by getting them to think bigger about emerging new technologies. So we would go into Fortune 500 companies, teach them about things that are really attacking their immune system. So if you look at a Fortune 500 company, they ultimately reject innovation, but yet they spend billions of dollars on digital transformation. But the core company has like a protective layer around it that's like very negative towards new technologies, such as we were talking about VR and AR at the time, blockchain technologies, the ability to be your own entrepreneur, like Uber, and what this meant for kind of unlocking various assets to work for you versus you work for the asset. Airbnb and stuff, and how do you implement elements like that? And as I mentioned, that was kind of my early part in understanding blockchain technology because we would go and educate Fortune 500 companies on what crypto and blockchain technology was. And the consulting game isn't necessarily my game. I'm a builder. Being in San Francisco, you're around a product mindset of building. And to me, it wasn't about the crypto. It didn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of noise out there. Well, how did Ripple? I didn't see the correlation between settlement and a token. So it took me a little bit to get the crypto, but I understood the power of distributed networks.
Mm.
And so it really came into the technology that I was pretty floored about where this really could go, right? If we could integrate this in existing systems, you could unlock external value versus this whole blockchain space was very much an echo chamber that didn't, you had to be an expert on different tokens. And I was like, well, why shouldn't everybody have this? And that's actually kind of the thesis that came behind Constellation, is making a flexible framework where blockchain could be integrated in existing technologies, and you wouldn't have to rip out and replace. So my aha moment was really around the community dynamics. There was this like cypherpunk movement. It was very anti-traditional venture capital. It was kind of this retail person could back the future, create a brand, and let that narrative exist. And there was like this ethos that I really bound to. And it really wasn't until we built our own currency that I actually got into the Bitcoin and crypto. I did tell a friend that was a head analyst at JP Morgan in 2013 that I thought Bitcoin was a joke because Farmville also had a digital currency. And, had I actually done a little more research and not just kind of been a know-it-all, I think it would have been a different story now. But it is what it is. And now I'm a complete believer once you see how the food is made, right? How the sausage is made.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating. We all have those stories where we've come across Bitcoin or crypto in one way or the other, but we ignored it or we thought it was a fad or something like that. And the
Right.
good thing is that we, unlike maybe some other people, we maybe the second go around or the third go around, we paid attention and actually learned about it. So, and now you're here building, which is pretty cool.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a very limited use case for Bitcoin. I mean, it made sense. Like you can't shrug off and be like, well, I look at all the things and people are buying drugs with it online,
Yeah.
and you're like, wait, that's going to be the major use case. Nobody's ever going to accept this if like it's the largest drug deal in the industry, and that's your use case. But yeah, so yeah, we've all had that, but you can't punish yourself and be like, oh, I should have had a crystal ball. Like it's just not the case. And people that said they did, you're crazy. So
For sure. Um, Now give a quick overview of Constellation Network, and what's its mission.
yeah, so I call Constellation kind of the blockchain of the future. And really what we're building is a network of data, where data should be a public good to make public impact. And what I mean by that is we believe in this message even back in 2017 when we started Constellation. So we've been around for a little while, but we believed in creating an alternative distributed network that people could easily put data on chain, validate that data, and be able to use it in various applications or infrastructure as they see fit. And so a lot of our thinking with Constellation in a nutshell was, why should we be forced to use a smart contract framework that's not flexible, but
Mhm.
use something that's really flexible to what real world developers do today? And that started to give its nod into, at the time, machine learning was what we were talking about. AI
Mhm.
hadn't had its boom around, being the massive consumer around big data. But now we're here today. So I look at Constellation really as kind of the future of what blockchain technology should look like, so that
Mhm.
it's enterprise grade, enterprise production ready, and validated by the Department of Defense. So notably, Constellation got our first contract with the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, to use blockchain for data assurance. So
Mhm.
at the time in 2019, which I think the industry in large jumped the gun on trying to find use cases and applications before it was really ready. We
Mhm.
shifted the whole narrative with the Department of Defense and said, how are your systems protected? How do you create resilience around the data that's moved throughout different workflows or systems? And that changed the whole conversation. And it changed the conversation in terms of what more could they do by adding immutability to your data, knowing the provenance of the data, knowing how to track it, and then be able to use an archivable footprint in various applications.
Mm.
So I really look at Constellation as kind of being the backbone for the future of AI, which is the future of data ingestion, multi-tenant authorship, a whole new slew of use cases that really haven't been explored by early generations of a blockchain just because of their limited technology and nature, their little limited economics. They pushed gas fees onto the consumer. We push our fees onto the applications that come,
Mm.
which allows them to bake their fees into a business model that would be used at an enterprise workflow.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned working with the Department of Defense, and um, obviously they don't want certain information out there, whether it's the
Right.
military, the U.S. Navy, and so forth. So, talk to us about is the Constellation Network a public chain, and is it private transactions happening on there, or is there like a subnet? How does that all work?
Yeah, there's Constellation's actually made up of really three networks to test, scalability and resilience. So we have a test net where we're testing out new protocol features, and then we have an integrations net. So this is basically a mirror of our public network that allow
Mm.
people to deploy and test out their applications before pushing to a public network. And then we have a public network. And the
Mm.
public network is kind of like any other chain. It's public to anybody that wants to follow it. All transactions are public. It's hosted by 300 nodes. But if you look at how we set up our test networks, what you can see is kind of a natural developer pipeline, right? When you look at a smart contract, you have to cross your fingers, hope the code is right, press deploy, and you're out. There's no testing, there's no debugging, there's no normal developer processes that we're used to when we look at other chains. When we talk about the Department of Defense, it's no secret they're building out a private network, and the
Mm.
private network basically uses tools that we built on the open source or public side, and they pay a licensing fee for to use those tools because so much has been invested into building out public tools, and then we apply those to the Department of Defense. We can tweak and modify that, and then we ship that back to the open source. So the hook there is really that they pay a licensing fee to the network. So that licensing fee goes to a governance group called Stardust Collective, and they pay those fees. But really, and where that's, why that's such a private, why that works on the private side is that they're still rapidly deploying and adding features and functionality that aren't available on the public side, right? So we need that kind of test environment for such a massive player as the Department of Defense as they look at so many use cases. They don't just look at one use case. We're very public about one use case, but they're exploring the same functionality across several other use cases. So
Wow.
that's so that's a little bit how that kind of works. But a lot of our vision is that in order to have the security and immutability that's not hackable, it's tamper proof, you need to go to the public ledger,
Mm.
right? And so there's kind of this time where it's tough bringing enterprise or federal organizations to say, hey, all my data is going to be on chain, it's going to be public, it's going to be available, but yeah, that's where all the security is. So it's kind of a process that you have to walk people through, especially at that caliber where there's so much sensitivity to information.
Yeah, for sure. And that's pretty amazing that you guys are working with the Department of Defense because I don't think a lot of people know of the government using blockchain in this way. And
Yeah.
assuming if there's, really good success here, it's going to be a flywheel effect where you can probably go to the other federal agencies and parts of
Oh
government
yeah.
pitch them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it is actually amazing. So we're of the 1%. Sorry, there's this like fly it's just like orbiting around me. I guess it's picking it up, but we're of the top 1% of all blockchain funding to date, and that means the entire history the federal government working with blockchain technology as early as 2016 to present day. So in the federal context, we're like a household name. In the
Mm,
crypto context, we're not really a household name, but we're solving the problems that we sought after.
mm,
So once you start working with the federal government, there's been some really fascinating developments where just 1 month ago I was at Scotts Air Force Base out in Illinois, and they called a meeting with various other players in the space. I can't really say names,
sure.
but they brought in so many different units to evaluate the technology, see the progress, and see where it can be applicable, right? And so just because you're going after one vein, the federal government has a interest by the public to be able to use this technology across multiple workflows or
Mm,
use cases, right? It's not in their interest to just fund one specific project and
mm,
just work with that. They need to see it applicable across, the Navy, the Army, Air Force, and then also all the other federal branches that are looking, cybersecurity,
mm.
Secretary of Defense. So it goes up different ladders around so many different use cases you can't even imagine. And we don't even imagine it, right? They come in and they're like, hey, what about that? And we're like, why is that of interest to you? And it just always shocks us every day. And they love seeing what we're doing. And we're always pushing the needle with the Department of Defense. So I think what's unique about Constellation is that our team also is very front of the house as well, or front of the stack,
Mm,
right? So we're doing stuff on the application level. So even though we're an infrastructure layer technology that's selling, blockchain or infrastructure into the government, we're also going so far to go, hey, this is what the user experience would look like. This
mm.
is how it would connect the dots, which a lot of people are visual learners and they need to see what this looks like,
Yeah.
because seeing a bunch of lines of code where you're securing events in databases like isn't going to really like move the needle. So you have to show how each user would be impacted or be engaging with the technology.
Mm. You know, one of the things that a follow-up question to that, obviously security is so important, right? Even more so
Yeah.
for you guys because you're working with the federal government. I mean, the Department of Defense. There's, I mean, there's geopolitics and there's so many implications to that, right? So who are your nodes or validators? How do you guys approach security and things like that?
Yeah, so right now we do a whitelist right now to kind of protect the state of the network.
Mm,
We're a little bit of a proof of authority at this stage, but that is definitely a concern for the future. So what we're modeling out is looking at reputation-based scoring to identify who are good and bad participants in the network based
mm,
on past performance of consensus. We still haven't built that in, but it's part of our line item that we have with the Department of Defense. So it's a great concern that we have to think about that. And if we can use programmatic capabilities to identify good actors and node operators or network, yeah, we've got something in our hands.
mm.
But the same issue still exists with a lot of DAOs that are formed, right? Even though DAOs can be decentralized and autonomous, there's still somebody that's holding the keys, right? So it becomes a problem across the entire industry. It doesn't matter which protocol you are on identifying not only the nodes, but the multi-tenant authors that are a part of each organization. And it starts with kind of a vetting of some capacity, which I actually think is going to be a huge leap for the entire industry once we can start to really identify that. But at least blockchain's better than just centralized threat vectors, right?
Right. Um,
Yeah.
are there any talks to have like parts of the government, like the Department of Defense, to run a node or multiple nodes and things like that?
Yeah, I mean they are running multiple nodes on their network. So we've set them up. We're now at a stage in our work with the federal government that they are managing their own nodes. They understand the technology. We're not just building it for them. The goal is to eventually hand this off, right? Then the goal is to get them to see the value of the public network and how more distributed nodes will actually increase their security.
Mm. Now earlier you mentioned the Stardust Collective, and you mentioned some of the fees are collected by the Stardust Collective. What is the Stardust Collective, and how does that function with the network?
Yeah, so the Stardust Collective, for all intents and purposes, is a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization that governs a lot of the network. So they really kind of started a couple years ago, but I wouldn't say until this year did they become they actually became an organization. They have articles. They're legitimate. They vote on the people that are coming in, but their goal is really to manage network economics, kind of guide the roadmap for us. What does the community want to hear? They're basically a representative of the community, but the way that I really see them is they're there to bring adoption to the network. So what does that look like from a programmatic standpoint? What tools do we need to unlock more participants coming onto the network? What economics do we need to really ensure that this exists for 10, 20 plus years? And then how do we get the word out? Right. And so they play a real vital role into ensuring that we don't have to do all that. We're here to just build. The core constellation is here to build, plant a vision, and they're really there to evangelize it and make sure all these things are working to attract the right audience that we want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, last week was the Hydef conference. Tell us about this conference and some of the major takeaways. I know the full conference, folks can view it on the Constellation Network YouTube channel.
Yeah, so the Hydef conference was really we started this like 2 years ago, and then we took a year off as we were just heads down on a huge sprint to get our application layer out called metagraphs, which are sub networks that are customizable. And so we were really heads down, right? And this year was kind of an unveiling of Constellation. And what we wanted to unveil at Hydef was our goal was really to kind of talk about what we've done to date, use this as a platform to attract developers. God, there's that flag in. Attract developers, and most importantly, plant a vision of the future. Where are we going? Why does this matter? And really stick a flag in the ground to show that we're a network of creating solutions. We're not just a network of creating developer tools that we hope and pray people figure things out, but really start to craft solutions that are geared towards problems of the next 10 years. AI being a big part of that. I think AI was a really big backbone of this. Secure information between organizations, using blockchain not just as a spot solution, but across different workflows. And so the conference was really there to talk about the future potential, show thought leadership, show expressions of our day to day, and invite the community to really take hold of this. Like in many ways, this is a conference for the community. So we really didn't have a lot of sponsorships. We had Panasonic and the Digital Chamber, but outside of that, we wanted this to be for the community. Have them see kind of the work that we're doing, get an understanding of our thought process and overall vision.
Now, two major partnerships that were announced, Panasonic and Common Crawl. Tell us about those partnerships and how you'll be working together.
Yeah, first, let me bite off Panasonic. One of the things that we've been showcasing is our technology with the DoD through the lens of a tough book, right? So a tough book it's a laptop that's really heavy. It's like a brick, and if you see these things in like cop cars, right? So when you see a cop car and they've got one of those middle consoles, that's a tough book, right? These things are military grade. They're out in the field, and we wanted to show how to activate a sub network through the lens of a tough book. Once again, showing through the application or hardware level can really help people contextualize what are we doing with blockchain today? What does it look like in our day to day, and how does it impact us as individuals? So Panasonic, we actively reached out to them and say, hey, we want to show this. We know these are, there's 10,000 of them in the Army alone. Let's showcase what we're building for the Air Force through the lens of a tough book, which really opened up an interest in Panasonic to better understand how we can use our developer tools across their suite of tools. They're one of the largest companies in IoT and hardware. So it's a natural fit. They're building out their own developer ecosystem. We're looking at kind of the forefront of development and applications that bridge kind of enterprise adoption with community. And so Panasonic was really, I would say, they were one of the more leading people in terms of thought process of where this technology can go and how they make themselves competitive for the future. So that was a pretty exciting partnership. They actually shipped out one of their tough book trucks. There's only two in the world out there, and they brought one to our conference. They sat on a panel. And so there's a lot to explore, right? Once again, this isn't just like, hey, here's our technology, run with it. It's like, let's explore the different avenues that we can really make an impact and really go forward. Interesting enough, we've had a relationship with them through a group called Conductive Capital. Conductive Capital invested in a subsidiary that we own called Door Technologies. So they are already really familiar with us, because we acquired the company Door Technologies that funded through Conductive Capital. So there was kind of a natural fit already there, and working with some of their other divisions. And so then that leads me into Common Crawl. Common Crawl was particularly important to me, not only, part of the reason is because the DoD has been looking at us as like, how do we understand the AI pipeline through the lens of blockchain? Right. So think about it in terms of supply chain of AI, right? What are all the pieces that make AI up? And they have a big mission on identifying the data that goes into large language models. Large language models are really the model that allows you to do AI functionality. Large language models consume tons of data. You train that LLM, which is very expensive, and then the output is something like a chat GPT. And so when we started looking at this lens a while ago of using blockchain towards another real world application, Common Crawl came up. And not many people, Common Crawl is not a household name, but Common Crawl has been around since 2007. They're basically a web crawler. So they've been crawling the internet to create an archivable footprint of the internet since 2007. They've crawled over 250 billion web pages to date, 19 billion alone this year. It's almost 9 petabytes of data. These aren't like numbers that we commonly use, right? It's really, really massive.
Wow.
And with the advent of AI for the consumer, like we saw with ChatGPT, there's been and more money going into large language models. Common Crawl, which supplies 80% of data into large language models, see this initiative to democratize data, make it more available to developers, make the internet still a free thing before it gets harvested just by AI and machine learning engineers. And so working with Common Crawl, now that they've had so many years under their belt of providing data to LLMs, they came to us looking for some joint solutions. So what we did to kind of kick off the relationship is start to validate recent web crawls on our blockchain. We're one of the only outfits that can provide this sort of flexibility to take an API data feed, put it on chain, validate that, and provide them with a token that it's been validated. Why that's important is because now we can start to explore solutions on the lens of cost efficiencies. So it's very expensive to run AI, and AI needs to be maintained as open source.
Right.
In order to do that, how do we do that? How do we create it more open source? Well, most of those web crawls require an engineer to pull on an S3 or do a web S3 query of that data repository, clean that data, put the clean data back into a centralized server, and then pull it again to train large language models. It's a very, very expensive process if you don't, I mean, even considering the GPU processing around all that. So what that means for us is like, how can blockchain start to explore ways to reduce cost efficiencies by using distributed networks and nodes to validate data and potentially create overlaps of shared data. Most data, 90% of data is not even used, is cleaned and shipped out. So that 10% of commonality, if people could share that data, we could reduce cost efficiencies, reduce the energy that's needed to query that data and train that data, as well as looking at other things. How do we, around AI ethics? So when we think about like, is there misinformation? Where did that data coming from?
Right.
Having some authorship or provenance on the data becomes paramount to working with like Department of the Defense, who's saying like, hey, we don't know how to use AI right now. We need to know where that data came from. Was it put in by an adversary? Was that wherever you pulled that data, was it
Yeah.
misinterpreted? Was it misinformed? We can start to use blockchain to identify real huge problems that exist in AI and are preventing that might prevent it from further consumption in the future by enterprises and federal agencies alike.
Wow. Uh, I have so many thoughts around that because my background's in
Yeah.
digital marketing. So I worked with Google a lot in crawling the web and crawling websites. And the fact that this company's been doing that since 2007, you mentioned, and then it's kind of taking it to the next version of search engines, which is through AI assistants or chatbots, whatever it is, and the fact that it can be verified now with blockchain, and you guys are helping to facilitate that's pretty amazing. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
and there's a lot of large language models out there. I don't have the exact number, but that are using data that's been illegally sourced. We're already seeing celebrities and musicians say, "Hey, that was used without a license of my service."
Mm,
Well, these things are happening so fast. So if you think about creating some sort of standard by which people validate the data that they used a license, they were correct, and they used it in a large language model. We can start to realize the potential of AI and use it against misinformation and illegal data being piped into large language models or the manipulation of marketing and services, right? At Hydef, I kind of preface some of my talk and keynote around the way that we received information back in the 1900s was big corporations. We trusted them. They were really big. They were on the stock exchange, but they also told us that smoking was cool and good. And so we took that and we ran with it. And what happened is like, oh, they went back and said, oh, you know what? We did all this research and it may cause cancer,
right.
right? So so where we are today is that now we're back into this like trusting mode of AI. Well, AI said it was good, so then it must be good, but we don't know what went into that model or who wanted to manipulate the model for their own outcome. But we are asking those questions. And over the last 10 years, why I think this technology is going the right way is because over the last 10 years, we started questioning groups like Facebook that we found out they sold our personal data to as like Boston something or another. I forget the name of it.
Right.
And we started looking at the T's and C's that we check off just to use a free product, of which they're selling data back to marketing and then manipulating our advertising or using it in some nefarious way.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's becoming so society as a whole is awake to the potential of this. They want to use AI. They are questioning it, and that's a perfect overlap for blockchain technology to really emerge as this Trojan horse and white knight to overcome and say, "Hey, we need to have some sort of scalable." Immutable provenance around the data. Where did it come from? And it's only going to help industries converge together. And I think when this happens, we're not going to look at crypto and blockchain as isolated industries, but we're going to see it converge with other major technologies to create a world and a frontier that we all envision from sci-fi movies.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing stuff, man. And it's fascinating. I will definitely have to have you back on, as those things develop and
Yeah,
go to production and so forth. But it's fascinating. It piques my interest just from my background, and I think it's definitely solving a problem. And like you mentioned, the Web 2 problem with data and verification and all these things, and what data is being fed into these LLMs. So very fascinating stuff. And on the note of Panasonic, it's fascinating to see these tech giants and electronic makers and so forth, like Sony, Panasonic, and so forth, are embracing blockchain. I guess they have to,
yeah.
or they're going to be out of
Well,
business.
I mean, I would say a year ago, people were very hesitant. I mean, over
Mm,
the last 7 years that we've been doing this, they were hesitant. I'm not going to lie. We had a lot of conversations. You named it, name it.
mm,
We had a conversation. Then we saw something turn over this year, which is really ironic because the U.S. government has been very much bullies across our industry and scared a lot of people away around the digital asset side. But when you look at the technology and what it can do, they're very curious. They see that there's a younger generation that have come into this space, right? In many ways, you can actually mirror it to how U.S. politics
mm,
are embracing blockchain and crypto. Which behind the scenes, and I did a panel on this, is that you're starting to see more bipartisan efforts. So both
mm,
Democrats and Republicans coming together and saying, hey, we need to adopt this. We need to figure out how to work with it, bring in innovation. And really, it's kind of an age issue. I hate to say it, but older congressmen and women and senators are a little more skittish about it, but younger generations are seeing the opportunity, and that really follows where developers and evangelists and enthusiasts are coming into the crypto space. If you want that momentum, you've got to go a little younger. What are the younger generations doing?
mm.
So it's a massive shift that's happening overnight. And if you look at even like I think it's something like 49% of both the Democrats and Republicans in the US are funded through crypto related activities.
Mm,
Like, holy crap. How do you turn your head on that? Not only that the US, 20% of the US have cryptocurrency wallets, like, okay, that's a large voter count, but like donor side, that's very bullish for this industry. And I think is a massive shift in maturity in our space and seeing that this industry can't be just such renegades. They actually have to come in and start working to lobby the potential of this technology. And I know that from being kind of at the forefront of talking about the technology through a technologist lens, not just a digital asset lens.
yeah, great point. And do you think part of the growing interest that these companies like Panasonic are paying attention now is because Wall Street kind of came in and added a level of validity? BlackRock's tokenizing, they're launching ETFs, and then you have
Yeah.
Fidelity and all these big names.
Yeah, for sure. I think that definitely happens, right? They're looking at this as it's like a commodity, right? They're giving legitimacy to it. They see that it's kind of here to stay. Um, it's tough to say because Panasonic is not in digital asset trading, right? So
Right.
they're not looking at BlackRock and being like, oh, you know what, we're going to start trading
Yeah.
Bitcoin futures and stuff, right? But they do see that more players are coming to this space, right? It's talked about. They're also starting to see more advancements in use cases, right? I still think that, if I go back to when we started all this, there were some key blockchains that overpromised the capabilities of the technology. It wasn't there yet. And so what you had is this kind of like this period of disillusionment where enterprise partners were like, oh, we explored that. Well, the bad thing, the good and bad of that. The bad is that you got to let a cycle go through where people are uh, reinvigorated because something new happens, right? Whether it's ETFs or new capabilities or somebody talking about blockchain differently, like Constellation, where they can start to see not only the technology but the marketability of the technology, right? I mean, technology is only so good as it provides a solution that's marketable, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of good technology out there that doesn't get marketing. And there's a lot of bad technology out there that gets a lot of marketing and a lot of hype. And so they have to sift through that. But now they see kind of they see movements happening in new ways. I would even say the Stripe. I think one of the bigger things was the Stripe acquisition of Bridge
Yeah.
for $1 billion. So to back what I was saying about that period of disillusionment where they're like, oh, we don't want to deal with that. Why that's of interest is because now you have M&A teams, merger and acquisition teams, doing due diligence and seeing the potential for where this will go over the next, 5 to 10 years,
Yeah.
right? Especially like a private company like Stripe. And so that period of disillusionment almost starts to stop there. Now we're seeing the real technology being bought by private companies, multi-billion dollar private companies going, okay, well, we need the next tranche of developers, integrators,
Yeah.
and users. What does that look like? And all of that really, really helps create more confidence and drudge up more interest that maybe it's safer to do this,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we can get involved. In the global politics, U.S. politics. I think if you're behind the scenes, no matter what party goes into office, I believe that there's going to be a pro crypto stance,
Yeah.
purely based off of the donor and funding profile of both parties. That something has to be done, right?
For sure.
And they're getting the right education. I don't think this is a partisan thing. I think it's, hey, something has to change because people are leaving the country. It's a waste of time for everybody because it's here to stay. Like
Mhm.
the technology is not going anywhere. Bitcoin's not going anywhere. So how do we embrace it and move forward?
Yeah. Great points. And I know the one reason why we've had all this political issues is one person, well, I should say two,
Yeah,
Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler. But we know, to your point, a lot of Democrats are like, yeah, we're not in alignment with that. We're going to work with our colleagues across the aisle to get legislation through the House, the Senate, and so forth. So things are moving ahead. And what a change. If you told me this was going to be the case in 2024 and 2023, I would not have believed you.
yeah,
Politicians campaigning on crypto, like I said, Democrats and Republicans aligning against people who are anti this technology, which it shouldn't be political at all. It's just a technology. It can
right.
benefit us creating jobs and wealth and so forth. So what a time.
It's a fact, I mean, and they're still talking about one application of the technology, which is the digital asset. And stuff, protocols like Constellation and Constellation's ecosystem, we're looking like 10 years out from here. So those and like I said earlier, the use cases have been very limited because there's been limitations on the framework.
Yeah.
And that means all the prior generations of blockchains have forced you into a framework and that yields a certain result or a certain product, which is digital assets being the primary thing. And as we kind of go forward in the future, we can start talking about the technology in conjunction with the digital asset and how that opens up more transparency, the ability to make public impact by having public ledgers. All of these things just really kind of paint a new future that we've just started to uncover new use cases that we weren't even talking about 2 years ago. And I think they see that now, and I think there's a lot more potential around that outside of just like safeguarding digital assets and the movement of money.
Mm. Now, speaking of stable coins and tokenization, are you guys working with different folks to have more of that built on Constellation? Any updates that you can share there?
Yeah, yeah. So we ran a hackathon over the summer. We finished in September. We kind of announced our winners late September, October. And what was really cool that I heard as feedback from the hackathon participants, we had about 700 people sign up. 50 submissions came out of that, which was expected. And then we had about 34 that were stuff that we thought really kind of nailed our vision. And what the overwhelming feedback was, oh, we thought this was going to be another Web3 limited framework, and then when we realized we could build this like a web application, this opened up all these ideas I had for data. So all of the winners really created a data narrative, tokenizing the collection of data, so incentivizing people to collect data, incentivizing or creating a marketplace for verified or validated data, and so many other use cases that added a token layer to a data collection or incentivization or processing, which I think is pretty fascinating, right? And I did a little bit of my keynote on this, which is like, if you break down the hackathon through a lens of inputs, processes, and actions or outputs, that's also a mirror of what an economy is, right? And so to enable more inputs or having a flexible technology enables more use cases, right? And so what we're seeing right now, and through the lens of the hackathon, we're starting to see more developers have that aha moment, right? It's different than traditional Web3 frameworks, right? That was very limited. We're not limited. We can enable more inputs, which enable more use cases, and tokenization of those use cases become a real interesting play in real utility or event-based mining, right? We explored this with one of our products called the Door Traffic Miner, where you basically are mined a mint or minted a piece of cryptocurrency upon the creation of an event or a piece of data, right? And so that event-based mining is kind of that attachment or connection to real utility that we can start to envision that wasn't done before, where you had like a smart contract, and then you distributed a bunch of tokens, and then you had to promise people real utility and be like, oh, well, we're going to use the token to do this, and we're going to use the token to do this. And I would look at pitch decks and there'd be people going, well, we're going to use our token for 100 things, and nobody did any of those things, right? But now with our systems, you can start to imagine a world of connecting the outside world to a tokenized event to create that kind of closed loop economics that any business. So we are seeing kind of somewhere north around 10 different subnets being worked on in our network right now. Some of them are tokenized. Some are really plugging data onto our blockchain and receiving our native token as a reward for data collection or data validation. So we're starting to see the tokenized data in a couple different realms.
Wow. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
on that note, what do you have on the remainder of your 2024 roadmap, and if anything for Q1 2025?
Yeah, so we're working diligently to get our ecosystem decks out the door. This will really kind of bring out more developers to create tokens. My goal is that I envision kind of this data token marketplace where you can see, hey, you got a piece of cryptocurrency for collecting driving data or validating neighborhood data or environmental information, right? And receiving some sort of incentive and being able to trade that around our ecosystem. But our ecosystem is really agnostic. It's not just about data. So we want to encourage the free flow of the ability to swap tokens between other developers in our ecosystem and for our core currency as well. Also kind of pushing through the end of the year, really getting more of our subnetworks or metagraphs out there that are really good businesses that people can follow, they can support, they can back. We have a list of different projects that have put together some pretty incredible visions that I think will scale very, very nicely across our network.
Oh, that's awesome. Ben, I'm really excited for the updates around, the future updates, I should say. And as more of these things
Yeah,
come to fruition and exciting stuff, I got some wrap-up questions here for you.
yeah.
First, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Man, yeah, I was not a big metaverse person at first. Yeah, yeah, that's a tough one. Probably a casino. I think it's not like rocket science, but I love a game of roulette where for as an entrepreneur, you're always kind of stuck um, in building out like things that you can predict a roadmap on, and sometimes taking that element, the human element out, and just leaving it to chance is great. But I think that a meta on a real note, a metaverse that could simulate future environments by plugging in data, future environments, meaning looking at like environmental impacts and training that data, training some sort of AI to come in, capture the data, make a predictive outcome, and fix that outcome, and play some of these scenarios out and how society would exist would be an amazing use of the metaverse where we could simulate where we are today. What if we added this factor, show causal relationships
Mm.
through disparate data sets all coming in, and show us a little bit of what the future outlook could look like in through a simulation of data inputs. I think would be kind of a miraculous step forward, not only in gaming, but in societal planning and government planning, if you look at it through that lens.
Oh, absolutely. Some rapid fire questions here. Favorite food?
I'm probably gonna have to go with one of my restaurants in San Francisco, Yokai Gozu. I gotta plug them, but I love Japanese food, sushi done omakase style, like warm. It's like dessert. I'm getting to eat dessert for a couple hours. It's amazing.
Nice. Favorite musician or band?
Man, that honestly, that's a tough one. I, you know, I'll say Benjamin Diggles, my co-founder, created. He does electronic music, and he did a track for my 40th birthday that was just out of this world and beautiful.
Nice. Favorite movie?
Oh man, you put me on the spot on some of this. There Will Be Blood, I think, is an amazing movie with Daniel Day-Lewis
Mm.
around kind of the spawn of entrepreneurship versus corporate control and the wild west of America.
Mm. Favorite book?
I have two on that. One is Thinking in Systems, teaches you how to think in kind of inputs and systems, kind of like I was talking about earlier. The other one is a little bit more occultish, called The History and Power of Mind. It's really taught me this book was written in like the 1800s and
Mm.
really teaches you how to control energy, mental output, and the energy that comes into you from other people, And so it's been a very impactful book on how I want to drive myself as a human going forward.
I have to check that one out.
Yeah.
And finally, when you're not working at Constellation Network, what are you doing for fun?
I, gosh, I think I spent literally my whole life kind of thinking about Constellation and different ways, different possibilities. But beyond that, I'd say my restaurants are my hobbies in many ways. It's creativity that's tangible. So it's nice to go from something digital and future looking, and we don't know what the heck a blockchain looks like. Is it purple? Is it red? Does it have brown hair? But a restaurant, you get to see the fruits of people's labor. It's a labor of love. You get an instant feedback loop. People love it, hate it. They've got thoughts. They're inspired by it. It, culinary experience is, sight, it's sound, it's touch. It really embraces kind of so much, and it creates an emotional element when you have amazing food. And then on the human level, it's really connective tissue, right? It brings communities around. I think that if it weren't for the restaurant and the culinary itch that I have, I don't know that Constellation would totally be here. There's an element, and I mean that kind of half joking, but I mean that in that food brings together community, right? Like you do stuff with people, it brings together people, it brings an ethos together. So much, we talk about breaking bread when we want to have a good conversation, right? Like
Right.
it's an integral part of our life and a source of inspiration and creativity.
That's awesome. Ben, absolute pleasure. And we'll definitely have to have you back on and excited for the future updates around Constellation Network. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tony. This has been awesome. You're a great host, and you make it easy to talk to. And I'd love to come back and give updates when you're looking for it. So.
Awesome.